this morning we're going to really be addressing that group of people, and it's a much larger group of people than you think, who do not think Andy Williams' song is right. Andy Williams is the one who sang "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year." I love that song, by the way. If I was a little more courageous, I would have tried to sing it for you. But I typically sing one phrase over and over. Are you like me, where you love music and you like a phrase and then you don't have a brain to think of any other words, so you just keep singing that over and over again? Yeah, if you know me, if you're in my home, you know that. I just sing it over. And then I make up words that I don't know. And it's actually very liberating because you can insert anything into the song at that point. You become the author. Anyways, there are a lot of people who think this is the most chaotic time of the year. It's the most chaotic time. There are a lot of people who think this is the most stressful time of the year. Now, I'm not talking about those Grinches among us who they humbug the festivities and the presents and the family get-togethers and the hoopla. And I'm not talking about those individuals this morning, but I do want to talk to those who might say it's the most difficult time of the year. It's the most difficult time of the year. There are people all around us and in this room this morning or who are streaming today who would like to love Christmas. They really would. They love to embrace the decorations and the spirit in the air and the festivities and the excitement about Jesus. They'd love to do that, but circumstances have made it very challenging to do that. What Christmas once was for them as a child has now become very difficult as an adult. What was once an easy thing to do for a blessed believer is now very difficult for a broken believer. And if Christmas isn't the most wonderful time of the year for you anymore, I want to speak to you because you often get overlooked at this time of the year. People don't understand you. They don't get you. They ask, how can you be sad at a time such as this? How can you be down when we're talking about Jesus and his birth? Well, I believe God gets you, and I believe God hasn't overlooked your struggles. I don't think in any way God has wrestled with why Christmas is hard for you. So today I want to address the Christmas mourner. And in doing so, I want to take you to a part of the Christmas story that we never talk about. We'll reference it, we'll make note of it, but we tend to leave this out. And it's interesting because of the 4 gospel accounts that tell the story of Jesus from creation even to ascension, only 2 actually record the birth of Christ, which for me has always been fascinating. I've always wondered, why wouldn't Mark take time to tell us about the virgin birth and all the things that surround it? Why wouldn't John go beyond just telling us that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us? The birth of Jesus is fascinating. And I think it should be included in any story you tell of Christ because nobody's been born of a virgin. But nonetheless, only 2 record the story of Jesus' birth. And of those 2, you've got Luke and Matthew. Luke spends about a chapter and a half recording all the things surrounding the birth of Jesus. Matthew also spends about a chapter and a half, just a much shorter chapter and a half. But of Matthew's record, whose is the first record in our King James Bible, half of his story is dedicated to something that we just don't want to talk about at Christmas time. It's not very Christmassy. It's not very festive. It's not very upbeat. It's not very exciting. It's not very encouraging. And it certainly wouldn't describe the most wonderful time of the year. And yet, God put it in his Word, which means he doesn't want us to forget it. He wants us to remember it. He wants us to digest it. He wants us to read it. The first half of Matthew chapter 2 tells the story of the wise men, and we all love the wise men. I mean, we 3 kings of Orient, they're super cool. They're the cool guys of Christmas. We're going to talk about them next Sunday. But the second half of Matthew 2 introduces us to the Christmas mourners. We're going to start reading in verse 13, and when we do, understand that the wise men have left the newborn king of the Jews, and have begun their journey back to their undisclosed homes without reporting to the evil King Herod. Verse 13, and when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt. Verse 15, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Verse 16, this cannot be separated from the Christmas story. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem. Let me repeat that. And slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, referring to the borders of Bethlehem, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Verse 17, then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Is that what you hear playing in the malls of Bethlehem at this time of the year? Is that what you hear playing in the restaurant? Parents walking in to have a bite to eat, do they hear that singing and they just jump in? You're right, it's the most wonderful time of the year. This is mourning that we cannot in our culture appreciate. When a few children, and I am not, by the way, in any way minimizing the loss of any life, but in our country, when there are a few children slaughtered by evil, cruel monsters in our schools, the country stops. This was every child 2 years of age and under in Bethlehem slaughtered by the government. Let's read again verse 18. In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted because they are not. What comfort could there be? They were gone. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeareth in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead, which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. Verse 22, but when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go thither. And notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, He shall be called a Nazarene. I think we can agree, referring to at least the Bible's Christmas, and there is plenty of debate as to how old Jesus was in this particular story. Obviously, Herod has a couple of years in there because when he was upset with the wise men for not reporting to him where the king of the Jews was, he remembered it was about 2 years ago. So this story encompasses some time in the early years of Jesus, but this is the Christmas story, and it wasn't a Merry Christmas for everyone. It certainly wasn't the most wonderful time of the year for everyone. This part that we just read of the Christmas story, it's in the Bible, I believe, for prophetic purposes. There are 3 instances where God says prophecy was fulfilled, prophecy was fulfilled, prophecy was fulfilled. That's to give the Messiah credibility. It's to give Jesus credibility as the Messiah. And so that's important, obviously, to the totality of Jesus. But I think part of this story, the Christmas story, having these ugly details in them, it's for a ministerial perspective as well. It's, in my opinion, for those of you who struggle during Christmas while the rest of the world celebrates. For those of you who mourn during the Christmas season while the rest of the world parties, this story is for you. There are three things that I'm going to share with you that I believe this story teaches, and I hope it's a help to you. Number one, just because you can't separate Jesus from your loss doesn't mean that he is responsible for your pain. Those of you who are struggling with anything, I would encourage you to write these down because you'll soon forget them. But I want you to travel with me to understand what I mean by that, but travel with me to Bethlehem so many years ago. We know what the Bethlehemites didn't know, but we know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. We know he was born in a place where there wasn't any hospitals and there wasn't any rooms in the hotel. So it was a place that was secluded and off, but we know that the shepherds were aware of it because of the angels, and they ran in to see Jesus, and they ran through the streets to say the Messiah has come, the Christ has come. And so we know that in Bethlehem at that particular time there was a buzz in the air. Word had spread of this miraculous birth and this miraculous angelic sighting in the shepherd's field, and so we know they're excited. We know there were rumors of these revered dignitaries coming into town, and boy, they looked incredible, and they had this caravan of goods. And so people in Bethlehem were thinking, wow, what's going on? The Messiah has come and has been born here, but never did they see him. Or at least we're not told that they saw him. Never was there any confirmation, or at least we weren't told that there was confirmation. But this much we must imagine, that while the city of Bethlehem is excited about what they're hearing by rumors, at the same time, there came a day when all of a sudden all of these Roman soldiers began to enter Bethlehem's borders, and they came in, and there was a stir, and there was a sense of uneasiness. Why is the government marching into our little town? Why is the governor sending all these soldiers? And then little by little, the mothers in Bethlehem could hear screams in a distance. And the screams would come closer and closer, and a sense of panic became a part of a maternal instinct of what's going on? Why are mothers all across my village and town screaming? And why are the guards getting closer? And then there he comes. There he is, that Roman guard or soldier that was responsible for my house. He comes to my house, and by order of the governor, I am to ask you, woman of Israel, do you have children? And this mom now, maternal instincts are kicking in, and she realizes what the screams were pertaining to. And in her soul, she says, I've got to protect my child, whether it's a newborn or a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. And she begins to close her mouth, and she refuses to answer. And her silence and the water in her eyes reveals to the soldier that there is a baby in the house. And he quickly pushes the mother aside, and the father's powerless and helpless to do anything. In that time, they could not do anything. And that dear mother, screaming and panicking, tries to go rescue her baby, her little child, only to watch the cold, ruthless Roman soldier take his sword out and snuffs out the life of a precious little baby. What was so exciting just weeks and months earlier has become so devastating. The news of the Messiah being born in our village was so exciting. But now it's devastating. Now it's unwanted. For had Jesus never been born here, had Jesus never been rumored to be here, I would still have my baby boy. My baby girl died because of the Messiah. And so again I read the word of God. In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. Losing a child must be beyond imagination and devastating. Losing a child in any fashion is a parent's worst nightmare. But I reckon losing a child in this fashion must be unbearable. Your child murdered, slaughtered simply because he may be the Messiah. Oh, and by the way, your sister, your best friend, your coworker, your classmate, she also lost her baby boy. Funeral parlors were booked solid. Cemeteries were overrun. Tissues were out of stock. All because of Jesus. This is the Christmas story. There are some here in this morning who can relate to this Christmas story. You think of Jesus, and while you know he didn't personally cause your pain, you do hold him responsible. And Christmas is so hard for you because everywhere you look, you're reminded of your loss. If you lost a child, you look around and see all the children opening presents, all the children on commercials, and you're reminded of your loss. If you've lost your child, you look around and see what everyone else has experienced. All the parents have their kids, and all the kids of those parents are celebrating Christmas with their parents, but you don't. If you've lost your spouse, you look around and see what everyone else has. All those annoying couples kissing all over each other and holding each other. If you've lost your spouse, you look around and see what everyone else is experiencing that you can't. You see, Christmas time is synonymous with family time. Christmas time is when families get together and celebrate together, and frankly, that's very hard for you. And like these devastated mourners in Bethlehem, you know Jesus didn't have the sword in his hand, but there's something in you that thinks, God could have stopped my pain. God could have prevented my loss. Why did God allow this? And you know, the Bethlehemites would have been right if they said in their bitter tears, had Jesus never been born here, my child would still be alive. Some of you going through hardship this Christmas have a real hard time separating Christ from your loss. You understand that Christ could have prevented your loss. Christ could have prevented your child or your spouse or some other loved one from being taken from you. Oh, and by the way, I'm not just speaking to those who are grieving the loss of a loved one. I'm also speaking to those of you this morning, and you know who you are. They're riddled across our landscape, but you're the one that says, yeah, Christ could have taken away my depression, the one that plagues me every winter, the one that plagues me when it gets dark out, the one that plagues me when there's all the stress of Christmas, the one that plagues me when there's all the financial burdens of the holiday season. You know that the same Christ could have stopped that evil person from ruining your family, or you know, that same Christ that could have helped your marriage, save your marriage, or get your spouse in line so that you could have that ideal Christmas with your family this year. But no, now I can't. And you're not blaming Christ exclusively for your problems, but you know he could have done something to stop it or to help it. So for those of you who are what I would call a Christmas mourner, let's face it, it's hard for you to separate Jesus from your pain. And I would have to say it would have been impossible for the Bethlehemites to separate Christ from their pain. But the reality was that Jesus was not the cause for their loss. Herod did that. Yeah, Jesus' birth and the wise men shunning the governor did instigate that crime, but he was an evil man who had evil desires, who had an evil heart. If it wasn't Jesus who would instigate that type of evil, it would be somebody else. The Bethlehemites were not living under some wonderful regime where they were given all this freedom and life was so good. No, the Romans were ruthless. They were cold. They were cruel. They were heartless. And frankly, Jesus had nothing to do with Herod's plot to kill the babies. Jesus did not make Herod do that. Jesus did not provoke him to do that. Jesus didn't suggest it. Jesus didn't tempt him to do that. And those Christmas mourners needed to place the blame entirely on Herod and not on Jesus. And so too in our day and age where we mourn, where we lose, where we suffer pain, where we get frustrated because of life circumstances, we have to make sure we place the blame entirely where it belongs. You say, well, where does it belong? On the curse. It belongs on the curse. It belongs on the thing that came about as a result of our sin. You see, when our race chose sin, God implemented a curse because sin always brings death. And when we choose to sin, we are supporting the decision that Adam made. Well, I didn't make that decision. Every time we sin, we're supporting his decision. And we have to play a role in the curse. And so the curse brought death, not Jesus. The curse brought depression, not God. The curse brought anxiety. The curse brought friction and tension. The curse brought loss. It brought pain. It brought sickness. It brought sorrow to our world. And during this Christmas season, even though we have a hard time separating Jesus from our pain, we have to make sure we don't hold him responsible. Because all the things we suffer in this world, you can trace it back, not to Herod, but to the curse. Number two, just because you can't see Jesus in your loss doesn't mean that he is removed from your pain. Where did Jesus go? I mean, these parents are left with many caskets. These parents are left with grief and sorrow beyond imagination. These parents are left with broken, devastated souls. And I can imagine the moms and dads of Bethlehem would want to go find that Messiah, go find the mom and dad of the so-called Messiah and confront them and say, why did you come here? Look what you've done to our lives. Look what you've done to our families. And yet they couldn't find him anywhere. Why? Because we read in the story that Jesus wasn't there. We read in the story that Joseph took Jesus and Mary under the cloak of darkness and left Israel and went to Egypt. And so they wanted to confront him, but he was nowhere to be found. Dear Christmas mourner, does that sound familiar to you? In your grief, in your sorrow, even now as families get together and life goes on for everyone else and they seem to be fine, and there you are ravaged with either depression or anxiety or great grief or great frustration or heartbreak, and you want to cry out to God and say, why did you do this? And yet he seems to be nowhere to be found. He doesn't answer your prayers. He doesn't seem to respond to your prayers. This annual sadness, this annual depression, the present grief, it's always there, and he seems to be nowhere to be found. But I'm here to tell you this morning, just because God is quiet doesn't mean that he is cold. Just because God is silent doesn't mean he is absent. You see, they thought the Messiah was nowhere to be found, when in reality he was just on the other side of the border. He was within distance. He saw their pain. Jesus knew their problems. And so for you, wherever you are this morning, understand that you may not be able to see God. You may not be able to hear God. You may not be able to feel God, but he sees you, he hears you, and he feels your pain. I love what Jesus himself would say in Matthew chapter 10. He asked the question, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. To number all of our hairs, you've got to be really, really close. You've got to have a great desire, a great care for a person. And Jesus says that every hair on your head is numbered. That means God's not absent. He's not distant. He's near. But Just because you can't see him doesn't mean he doesn't see you. You know, it's natural to feel like God is responsible for your pain. And it's natural to feel like he has abandoned you in your darkest hour. Some of the greatest men of God ever to walk this planet said words like this: Lord, why castest thou off my soul? Why hidest thou thy face from me? Another great man would say, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord, my sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. He said, I remembered God and was troubled. Just a memory of God, it just troubled him. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. He would go on to ask the question, hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Let me make a statement that everyone, whether you're grieving or not, you should hear. Feelings are usually far from factual. Feelings are usually far from factual. They're legitimate. They matter. But they are rarely the truth. Why? Because like a tearful perspective, when you're looking at the world with tears in your eyes, you're seeing things blurry like. You don't have a clear picture of what's going on. And sometimes our feelings warp the reality and truth of the situation. And so I'd rather you hear the words of the sweet psalmist of Israel, who said in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart. The Lord is near to them who have a broken heart. God gets close to those who are broken. God gets close to those who are grieving. God gets close to those who are overwhelmed with a burden that they can't carry. God draws nigh to them. He has a heart of compassion, and just because you can't see him doesn't mean he's not there. I want you to seize the picture of this story. Jesus came to Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem, and then he left it. Now the picture is Jesus came to this world, and then he left. With that in mind, listen to the words of Paul the Apostle. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession, for we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. We have a high priest who came to this world and then he left and he went somewhere else, but there he is mediating on our behalf. There he is, touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He understands brokenness. He understands sorrow. He understands loss. And hold on to that picture, as I mentioned, number 3. Just because you can't make sense of Jesus with your loss doesn't mean that he isn't going to remedy your pain. The story tells us that Jesus came back. Isn't this the story we read? Is the angel tells Joseph to take Jesus away. So Jesus came to Bethlehem and then he left Bethlehem. The story then tells us that eventually Jesus comes back into the land of Israel. It's a return. It's a second coming. But all that time in between, the poor parents of Bethlehem would ask themselves, did my son die in vain? Where is the Messiah? He cost my son his life, and where has he gone? Where is he? If he's here, he should fix my problems. If he's here, he should fix our problems. He's the one we've been waiting for. Well, the first time he came, he didn't fix any problem. In fact, the first time he came in our story, he revealed the problem. He revealed by his birth that there is evil in their world, that there is tremendous evil that causes death. And that's kind of the whole point of sin. We have to understand that the wages of sin is death. But the second time he came, in our story, he does fix the problem. He fixes the problem not by being born, but by being crucified. You see, the second coming of Christ in our story is where the remedy comes from. Had Jesus come back into Israel and made a journey into Bethlehem and went to the graveyard and resurrected every one of those little baby boys who was killed by Herod, would that solve their problem? It might remedy their grief temporarily, but it wouldn't solve their problem. There still is a problem called sin, and sin produces death, and so every one of us has to say goodbye to loved ones at some point, and ultimately at the end of our lives. So the true problem is the curse, and Jesus didn't fix it during his life because he needed to do something much more important on the cross. As John would say it, behold the Lamb of God which taketh away the sin of the world. He needed to take the sin of those children, the sin of those parents away so that they could be reunited together, not just in this world for a few years, but forever, permanently, eternally. And I want you to think of those poor Bethlehem parents, if they were paying attention. 3 decades after they lost their babies. If they were paying attention, they would take note of this man who people are calling the Christ, this man who they say fed 5,000, this man who they say gave vision to the blind, who they say gave hearing to the deaf, this man who they say walked on water, this man, he's the one. And yet he's on the cross. And if those parents in Bethlehem had enough mathematical skills, they would have said, wait a minute, he looks like he would be Josiah's age. It's him. He's responsible for my son's death. But if they were paying attention, if they were listening to the teaching of Christ, if they were listening to God, if they saw the open tomb, they say, yes, he was responsible maybe for my son's death because he was born, but he's responsible for taking our sin away because he's been resurrected. And so Jesus can bring me back to my son in the next life because he can take my sin away. And that is the true remedy, my friends. So, dear Christmas mourner, as you mourn your loss and pain, it's easy to wrestle with God's apparent lack of help. It's easy to shake your head in reverential frustration at God's apparent lack of movement on your behalf. It's easy to say, why did he allow it? Why is he not taking my pain away? Why isn't he fixing my issues? Well, this story that maybe up to this point hasn't encouraged you, if you appreciate what it's teaching us through this picture, it's teaching us that the remedy for all of our pain, and the remedy specifically for your pain, it is found in Jesus Christ and in him alone, but specifically, it's found in the second coming of Christ. It's found in the return of Christ, because he took away our sin at the cross, and when he comes the second time, he will make all wrongs right. When he comes back the second time, he will reunite born-again mother and born-again daughter, born-again father and born-again son. He will reunite born-again husband and born-again wife. Are you listening? If Jesus is your Savior, when he comes the second time, all the curses you've been experiencing will be made right. Amen. The depression that plagues you every Christmas will be gone. The anxiety that makes you so anxious and tight every day of your life, especially during Christmas, it'll be gone. The sin that ravishes you, that tempts you, that you just can't walk away from it, it'll be gone. Are you following me? No tissues are needed after Christ comes back the second time. No cemeteries to visit after Christ's return. He makes everything right. Christmas time, we focus on the first birth, or the first coming, the birth, and we just, we're glad, we're grateful that he came. But it doesn't fix your problem now. Well, the story of Christmas is not just about him coming, it's about him coming again. He told his apostles, he told his precious disciples, if you believe in God, believe also in me. He said, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'll come again. I'll come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, you can be there also. And gentlemen, it's not about here and now, but coming a day we're all going to be together and the curse will be gone. Dear Christmas mourner, it may not be to you sufficient, but the Christmas story has something for you. It's called hope. It's called hope. There is coming a day when your loneliness will be in the rearview mirror forever. See, this crosses almost everyone in this room. I look out and you do a great job dressing up. You look very nice this morning. But I know many of you. And I know the mask is paper thin. I can look at any pew and I can see a broken mother's heart because her daughter or her son is not walking with God, and Christmas is a reminder of that. I can look out there and I can see a woman or a man who seems to have it all together. They can stand up on the platform and worship God or minister to God, but deep down inside, they hate who they are and they can't stand who they are and they just can't figure themselves out. I can look across the congregation and I can see marriages that are broken, desperately broken. I can see couples who wish they were married. I can see people who wish they weren't married. I can see people whose children are just breaking their hearts. I can see people who can't cope with Christmas because their husband's not here or their wife's not here. All of us have something that, if we were honest, we hate dealing with. But it gives me tremendous joy to say to you, if you're a believer, if you're a born-again believer, if you've accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, pick a problem. When Christ comes back, gone. Gone. Sayonara. Hasta la vista, baby. Gone. Christmas mourner, Jesus didn't cause your pain. And he certainly sees your pain. And there is coming a day when he is going to fix your pain. If this is the most wonderful time of the year for you, embrace that. Keep thinking that. Celebrate that. Make it the most wonderful time of the year. Because there is coming a day when life will steal that joy from you. And when that comes, remember, there is a place for you in the Christmas story. Dear Christmas mourner, you have not been forgotten. You've not been overlooked. You belong in the Christmas celebration. You belong in the Christmas story because there is hope for you, both now and forever. Let's all stand, if you would, for a moment.